Time to elevate. You're running on empty with Matt and Tony.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Running on Empty. I'm Matt.
And I'm Tony.
And we are running on empty. And Tony, we got a great show today. We have an awesome interview. So let's just jump right into it.
Yeah, we are very interested in the movement to try to legalize marijuana in Wisconsin for both recreational and medical purposes. Wisconsin is standing almost alone in the Midwest as not making enough progress on that front. But we have with us today, we're privileged to have one of the leaders in that movement, and she is Senator Melissa Agard, one of the rising stars, actually, in the Wisconsin State Senate. Senator Agard, in November of 2020, was elected to represent the 16th Senate District. That district contains parts of the northeast and southeast sides of Madison, Wisconsin, and several surrounding cities. Before her election to the Senate, Melissa Agard served 4 terms representing the 48th Assembly District. She also served 2 terms on the Dane County Board of Supervisors. Senator Agard is a mother of 4 sons, and the family lives in Madison, Wisconsin. Senator, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Now, we know that you are the lead author of Senate Bill 545, which would legalize cannabis in Wisconsin for both recreational and medical purposes. Before we get to the specifics of the bill, we know that you've been sponsoring this for at least 8 years now, since the time you were in the state assembly. Tell us about your passion. How did you get passionate about this? How did this become one of your signature issues?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and something that I point to in the Capitol building is when ideas are brought to you by the people of your community, you know that you're headed in the right direction. And I did not campaign on the platform of legalizing pot in Wisconsin. It frankly wasn't on my radar, and it's not a big part of my own personal culture. But after I was elected, and maybe a little bit even before I was elected, as I was knocking doors and pounding the pavement, so to speak, through my campaign, I had people coming up to me and sharing with me very personal, compelling stories about how the prohibition of cannabis in Wisconsin was harming them and harming people who they love. Whether it was the mom who was talking to me about her son who lost his scholarship and housing opportunities for college because he was pulled over for missing taillight on his car, and the police found a blunt in the ashtray, or whether it was how egregious our racial disparities are when it comes to arrests for simple possession in Wisconsin. The fact that Black and brown people are between 4 and 7 times more likely to be invited into the criminal justice system, so to speak, than white folks, or people who had left the state of Wisconsin to learn about and become part of the cannabis industry and wanted to be able to come back and pollinate that knowledge and bring the industry into Wisconsin, but they weren't able to, or parents with very ill children whose peers in other states were able to provide relief to their kids with access to cannabis. And the stories could go on and on. I mean, we could fill this segment telling those people's stories. But it was really clear to me that through these stories, that the most dangerous thing about pot in Wisconsin is that it's illegal and prohibition is not working, and that we needed someone to step up and bring forward legislation, not just for medicinal, because as many of the stories I just shared with you, it's not just the medicinal aspects, it's the racial disparities aspect, it's the individual prosperities, it's the personal liberties and freedom. And that's when I made the decision to start working on this bill. And as a freshman legislator, deep in the minority, to be working on such a big policy and think about how different time was 8 years ago. It has been, it was, and it continues to be an amazing ride to be part of. And I've learned so much, and I am even more resolved now than I was then to address these wrongs and to do everything that I can to legalize cannabis in our state.
Now, when you first started sponsoring this, you had very few co-sponsors. Is that correct? And how many do you have now?
Yeah. So the very first time that I put the bill out, I put it out and there were, I believe, 4 other people that put their name on the bill. There were 5 of us that sponsored the legislation in the first legislative cycle. And this legislative cycle, I'm continuing to get, I think, just as recently as a week or 2 ago, I had a legislator add their name. So we're well into the 30s now.
Wow, good.
Wow.
Well, but the big challenge here is that it continues to be only Democrats. Not every Democrat has signed on, but all of the people that have signed on are Democrats.
But I'm sure, Senator, that the Republicans hear the same stories from their constituents that you were hearing. You know, people that would be helped by cannabis medically. You know, people who see the economic benefits of legalization for recreational. What's going on with the Republican Party that they won't even schedule a hearing for this?
It's a really good question. And if I could answer that, then I think I could probably overcome that hurdle. This bill includes provisions that will protect our communities in ways that they are not protected with prohibition. And many of those provisions have been brought to me by people who have originally thought that they were prohibitionists. People who are afraid of legalization. But right. Because they have shared their stories with me, we've been able to address that in the legislation. I very much believe, I think the bill this session is around 100 pages, that it's 100 pages of protections for people in Wisconsin that currently don't exist. And, you know, the bottom line, I know that this has been a little bit more of a winded answer than probably what you anticipated, but it comes down to the fact that our legislative districts are so rigged that my colleagues in the Republican Party do not need to be answering to the will of the people. Their constituents want cannabis to be legal just as much as my constituents. This is not a partisan issue anywhere than in the Capitol building. And the reason why it is that they're not bringing it forward is because their party isn't getting their pockets lined by special interest groups and rich and wealthy people asking them to pass this. So let's unrig the system. Probably the podcast is gerrymandering. I know that's a big word, but we need to make sure that the legislature actually represents the people as opposed to the legislature representing their anointed interests.
Senator, in many of the states where cannabis gets legalized, it's through a vote of the people via referendum. We don't have the ability to do that in Wisconsin, do we?
We do not have binding referendums in Wisconsin. And one of the things that I heard early on, probably the first session or 2 that I put the bill out, was there's no way Wisconsin will ever be able to legalize cannabis because politicians are not strong enough in the spine to take a stand like that. All of the states that had legalized up to that point had done it through binding referendums. As you point out, and Wisconsin does not have binding referendums. But we do know through non-binding referendums across the state of Wisconsin, red and blue communities, that people in our state actually do believe we should be legalizing. And we also know that many states, since the original introduction of this bill, have moved forward with legalizing cannabis through legislative action as opposed to simply through referenda. So certainly we can be doing this in Wisconsin. We know that it would be good for our farmers. It would be good for it would be good for our social justice issues. Not only would we be bringing revenue into the state, but we would be saving money that we are currently bleeding into, for example, the criminal justice system.
You mentioned farmers, Senator. Would you go as far as to say that if something like this were to pass, it could literally rescue some family farms?
I know that to be the fact. In fact, I have had family farmers who have reached out to me and shared with me, our heritage here in Wisconsin is really one of honoring work, and work being something that we define ourselves as individuals by. And it makes us be healthier, happier people to have that work be part of our lives. And many of these farmers really, they are so, they have such close relationships with their land and with their community and such pride in being able to take care of their families. But it is getting harder and harder to do that on corn and soybeans, and especially with the number of corporate owned farms in Wisconsin that are coming that they have business plans. I've had multiple farmers contact me that actually have business plans drawn up so that when cannabis is legalized here in Wisconsin, they can reinvigorate their family farms, change the industry in which it is that they are working, and create not only prosperity for their own families, but jobs for people in their communities as well. I do know that this is the right thing for farmers in Wisconsin.
Well, I hope rural Wisconsin is listening to you, Senator, because it seems like so many people are voting against their own interests, right? And so, I mean, if what you're saying is accurate, and I am sure that it is, you would think that the red counties on this issue alone might see a need to change the makeup of the legislature.
I certainly hope that they are listening. I think that one of the things that is challenging in politics right now is people question whether their vote matters. And
Yep.
Oftentimes what we're seeing is lower voter turnout and lower engagement in the more rural parts of our state, partly because of these narratives. But one vote can make a difference. There have been so many elections across our nation, and including in Wisconsin, that have been decided by one vote or a half a dozen votes.
Yes.
And if we can change the makeup of our legislature, we can start doing things that benefit people across Wisconsin, including our farmers, such as ensuring that everyone has quality health care, that we legalize cannabis, that our kids get the education that they deserve, and that we invest in our natural resources so that we can hunt and fish and feel like when we eat them, that it is healthy and safe for ourselves and our family.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as you pointed out, there's an awful lot of people that are either not engaged or aren't looking at that whole suite of issues and how it is that they impact each of us. But yes, cannabis legalization is something that would benefit people in urban and rural Wisconsin. And I do wish that people would make it be a pivotal issue in which it is they decide who they're going to vote for and how it is that we're going to change Wisconsin's landscape.
Well, why don't we talk about the specifics of your bill, Senate Bill 545? What, if you can give us the short version of what specifically it would do?
So in a nutshell, this bill would tax and regulate cannabis for responsible adult usage, very much in the same way that we tax and regulate alcohol in Wisconsin. It would also have a provision in the bill that would provide people access to apply for medicinal cards. And one of the greatest benefits of having that medicinal card, that medicinal access, is that you would not have to pay sales tax on your purchases. I don't think that medicine should be taxed, frankly.
Agreed.
Believes that medicine should not be charged for, but we can have that conversation another time. And there's provisions in the bill that would allow people the opportunity to grow 6 plants for their own personal use, as well as a provision in the bill that would close the industry down in Wisconsin to Wisconsinites for the first 5 years, so we can make sure that we are investing in our main streets and our farmers and our community before it is that we open the industry up to other people. In addition, there's provisions to allow for people to petition for expungement and release if they are currently sitting for nonviolent cannabis-related offenses. As I mentioned earlier, a good portion of the revenue would go into community reinvestment funds that would support people that have been most harmed by the prohibition of cannabis. And part of that fund would also include money for people of color and women to be able to apply for grants so that they themselves could enter into the industry as well without to capital. And again, there's a lot more in the bill, but I feel like those are really the high points of opportunity that is provided by the legislation. And there are also many protections included in the policy as well.
The governor, Tony Evers, tried to get this through in his budget. Was what he was trying to get through essentially what your bill would do?
Yes, there are very minor changes, but the governor and I are in agreement that the most dangerous thing about cannabis in Wisconsin is that it is illegal, and that we absolutely should be legalizing cannabis for responsible adult usage and providing an avenue for medicinal access and increasing our economy and prosperity at the same time. And it's really unfortunate that my Republican colleagues continue to stand in the way of allowing Wisconsin to do this when we know it's an industry that's not only knocked on the door of Wisconsin, but it has entered Wisconsin. It is a very successful industry in Wisconsin, just happens to be in the black market.
Exactly.
On the other side of that coin is, I don't know if either of you have driven down to Sunnyside dispensary down in South Beloit, but if you have, you would notice that the vast majority of the cars in that parking lot happen to have Wisconsin tags on them. So our tax dollars are leaving the state of Wisconsin and entering Illinois. And I personally would like my tax dollars to stay here.
Yeah, absolutely. Senator, I hear a lot of people make objections to recreational marijuana. I mean, I disagree with them, but I think I can intellectually understand how someone would think that recreational, I don't know, just would have bad impacts. What I've never really understood is any opposition to medical marijuana. I mean, isn't that strictly compassion? And don't we have medical peer-reviewed research that shows the benefits of it? Like, how could anyone oppose the use of marijuana for medical reasons? I don't get that. Can you educate us a little bit here?
So it gets a little bit challenging for me to wade into waters that I don't agree with, but
Right.
I try very hard to have an open mind when I talk to folks. I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to medicinal marijuana, medicinal cannabis, is that the plant is currently scheduled at the federal level on a list of really dangerous substances. And because of that, we're not able to actually study cannabis in a laboratory setting in the way that we study traditional medicines, or we study medicines in general in our nation.
Gotcha.
Because we don't have any peer-reviewed studies in our country, we're dependent on studies that have been done in other countries, for example, Israel or Canada or Mexico. And here in our country, we're awful proud of the American way and the seal of the United States of America, and especially when it comes to the FDA. We do things our own way. So one of the very important things that needs to happen is at the federal level, this plant needs to be rescheduled. This isn't just a conversation about state legislatures, but we also
Right.
to remember that there are federal actions that need to be taken. And one is that rescheduling of the plant so that we can get those peer-reviewed studies, the cause and effect studies done so that we can have that proven fact of the medicine. Now, certainly there's lots of people, and I think people that you're alluding to, that do find medicinal type relief from this plant. And as I mentioned earlier, especially parents with very, very sick children or people that are navigating cancer or glaucoma, Crohn's disease, et cetera, that they themselves can admit to the fact that there are benefits, but that's not how it is that we define medicine in our country. So
Right,
I think
exactly.
that's a challenge.
I have seen firsthand medically how this stuff works against things like Crohn's disease, cancer, and whatnot. And I've had discussions with some conservatives who are fully behind this. But then you've got they're holding things up. What kind of reasons are they actually giving you? Like, we can't do this because X, Y, and Z. I mean, what's their biggest complaint about why it shouldn't be legal?
So I'm assuming they means my Republican colleagues here in the state Capitol building in Wisconsin. I just want to make sure who it is that we're talking about. But I would say that there are a few high point areas that it falls down. One, the continued classification at the federal level on the federal prohibition, the lack of action at the federal level. Number two, they very much still consider this to be a gateway drug, even though the science proves that it is not. Three, they talk about the fact that they're not hearing about this as a priority from their constituents, but that also really surprises me because so many people from across Wisconsin that don't live in my district reach out to me, and I do share that information. So as you mentioned earlier, point taken, people do need to reach out to their elected officials and let them know that this is something that is important and that they're going to be paying attention and it will impact who it is that they're voting for. Oftentimes what we see is folks will say on the campaign trail, yeah, I support this. And then after they're elected, they continue to not add their name to the legislation of the champions. So, let's make sure that we're holding our federal delegations accountable. And see what we can get changed at that level. Let's make sure that people find their voice and reach out to their elected officials. And also let's remember that science matters, and cannabis is not a gateway drug any more than water is, for example. And that frankly, the will of the people is the law of the land, and it is our job, elected officials, to make sure that we are acting in response to our constituents, our bosses, the people, the great people.
Well, and you had said earlier, the constituents, I mean, it's not a partisan thing, like, in Colorado here, I know a lot of Republicans who smoke pot, I mean, and recreationally, but it just seems to be like this disconnect between facts, reality, science. It's just, I don't know. It's, the whole pandemic thing kind of goes along that thing too, with the conservative side of things, but I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, the federal thing is obviously a big deal. Do you see any traction with that getting rescheduled, descheduled? I know there's a couple of things trying to go through, but I don't know if it's even the right language or the right way to go about it.
So I do know that there are a number of bills at the federal level that continue to have forward momentum, and it is really refreshing, for example, in the US Senate, to know that there are high-ranking members of that body that are putting their name on the stamp as a champion of cannabis reform. We do need certainly to make some changes, for example, to our banking regulations, as well as the classification of the plant, in order to be able to move forward, even at the states' rights level. But when my Republican colleagues talk about the fact that, it's a problem at the federal level, they are also the people that bang the drum and talk about states' rights and laboratories of democracy and people's personal liberties and freedom, right? So, I mean, I do think that we need to remind them that hypocrisy is not an attractive trait. And that the majority of the people in our country now live in states that have legalized cannabis, and we are continuing to lose out here in Wisconsin because they are acting like ostriches and burying their heads in the sand rather than.
You're surrounded by legal states. I mean, Minnesota, Michigan, now Illinois. It's crazy when you go to a dispensary here in Colorado. It's almost Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska. I mean, it's all leaving. We're getting the revenue and everything, but it's crossing the border. Depending on the holiday, Texas actually sets up checkpoints. I don't know. I wasn't sure if that was legal or not, but somebody went through with the thing of edibles around Memorial Day, got a $30,000 fine with a court date in 4 years. Wow. I don't even understand what that is. But that's Texas, Texas, I think, is missing out too. But with Wisconsin being surrounded by legal states, I mean, it's a matter of time, right? I mean, it's at least an optimistic thought, right?
I often do say it's not a matter of if this is going to happen, it's a matter of when it's going to happen and what it's going to look like. And I very much believe, it's possible that legalization will be a national effort, and all states will be legal in the same way that gay marriage became legal overnight because of federal action.
Yeah.
But I do also know that the bill that I have worked on over the last 8 years is very Wisconsin specific and really honors our culture and our heritage in the state. It honors the concerns as well as the dreams of the people in our communities. And, it's not about having the bill pass that I have drafted, but I want to ensure that we do have a bill pass in Wisconsin that really does right for the people of our state. And a lot of challenges we face in Wisconsin, being the worst in racial disparities. We can't forget about that, and we need to make sure that when we take action like this, that we do have a social justice lens when we're looking at it.
Senator, can you talk a little bit about the growth and use of something called Delta 8? And how does that relate to our failure to legalize cannabis?
Well, I think, I don't know a lot about D8 or Delta 8. My very basic knowledge is that it's hemp plants that have been stressed into a byproduct that acts very much like THC. And I think that it's an example of, there's a long list of these, whether we're talking about spice, K2, D8, where people do look for the feeling and the relief that is provided by cannabis. But there is nothing that is, in my experience, there is more harm provided to our communities and to the people in our communities through these alternatives than by a simple plant that grows through the ground that for thousands of years, people, and maybe even more than thousands of years, that people have been utilizing within their cultures to provide relief and to provide a sense of euphoria and relaxation that does not do the harm that these byproduct substances can do, as well as that even alcohol. We're talking about Wisconsin. Let's talk about a substance that provides harm to our communities, that alcohol.
That's what I was getting at, Senator. It's like the legislature's failure to act is creating this hunger for these alternatives that we don't have a lot of good data on their safety. And so if the legislature would do the right thing, I think we could, as you suggest, greatly minimize the harm. Let me ask you one question about teenagers. Some people insist that if we legalize cannabis, teen usage of marijuana will increase. But you wrote an article where you say that's not true. Is that right?
So I've done a lot of research on that. I'm a mom of 4, and 2 of them are in their early 20s and 2 of them are in their teens. And I very much believe that our young people need to be taking care of themselves, and we as adults need to be taking care of our kids, and they need to have good sleep, and they shouldn't be on video games all the time. Their phone can't be attached to their eyeball. Healthy food, exercise, lots of water. Let's pick up a book with pages in it and do some reading. Those are all really important for our kids, especially knowing that their brains are developing until they're 26 and their bodies are developing until into their 20s as well. So ensuring that our kids are making the best decisions for themselves and that our society is set up in a way to protect our kids is very, very important to me. And I have looked at the data from states that have legalized cannabis, and with provisions like those that have been instituted in Colorado, we have actually seen a decrease in youth usage in some states and a flat line of youth usage in other states, and certainly a decrease in alcohol consumption as well. So, my bill, and oftentimes when I go into high schools, kids start applauding for me when they learn I'm the pot lady, right? There's a reason why I chose the age of 21 as an age limit for access to cannabis with this legislation. And frankly, I did ask myself whether I should put it at 26 instead of 21 because of what it is that we're learning about brain development and body development. But because alcohol is at 21, we did land at that spot. Right. And now tobacco is at 21 as well.
Yeah. Great. Senator, we know you have to go, but if there are people listening that really are passionate about this issue like you are and want to see it pass, what should they do? So
I absolutely suggest that people reach out to their elected officials at the state legislature, so their state representatives and senators, and register their support or opposition to this policy and ask their legislator to sign on as a sponsor or to consider seriously what it is that we could change to encourage them to be sponsors if they are not. Remember when you go and vote where people did stand on this issue. And you can also reach out to your local elected officials because there are many communities across Wisconsin that are working very hard to decriminalize cannabis. I do not think that this is the best answer, but it is a better answer than where we are now with prohibition. We are all in this together, and one person, one voice does make a difference in changing policy.
Senator Melissa Agard, thank you so much for being with us. We think that you're amazing.
Thank you so much.
Very much. Thank you so much. And we hope you can come back again at some point in the near future and give us an update.
I look forward to that. If we want to do a version 2, I'm in.
Oh, awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Keep doing what you do.
Thank you. Take care. Stay healthy.
Take care. Tony, you lined up some of the greatest interviews for this show, so thank you very much. That was fantastic, man.
I really love listening to Senator Agard. I mean, what I really most loved about that, Matt, was how she said that she became an advocate for cannabis legalization just by listening to her constituents, knocking on doors, hearing stories. I mean, imagine that, a politician actually responding to people at the street level.
What a concept.
I know, right?
Wow.
And I just, look, when we are surrounded by states that are moving toward legalization or that have already legalized, it just doesn't seem to make any sense to maintain this stature. Do they really prefer to have a black market for this stuff? How is that safer?
Well, it would be interesting if we could get some numbers for like how much revenue is leaving the state. I mean, obviously people are going to Illinois, they're going to Michigan, they're going to Minneapolis, you go to Missouri now, so.
Yeah, one of my students this semester is actually from Illinois. She lives right close to the Wisconsin border. And she was telling our class last week, because we were talking about marijuana legalization and the rhetoric of it.
Mm-hmm.
She was saying how when you go to the parking lot of this dispensary that's like right across the border, she's like, all you see are Wisconsin plates. It's like the Wisconsin people are just. So shouldn't that tell our elected officials in Wisconsin that the time has long passed for this?
Yeah, let's send them a video saying, by the way, the last 1,000 cars that came into our parking lot all came back to Wisconsin. Man, seriously.
The thing is, though, I think a lot of these people operate from stereotypes that say in dispensaries, you've got like burnouts. And from living in Colorado, the dispensaries are very professionally run.
They're amazing. And if you go to Nevada, because I've been to the ones in Nevada, these are like high-end boutique things. And there is no, obviously you're going to see people in there once in a while, sometimes more than once in a while, that you would call burnouts, or they kind of look, the hippie culture, they got the ponchos or the drug rugs on, or tattoos or whatever. But there's no standard. I've seen people in scrubs standing in line waiting to get their stuff. I've seen people in suits doing that. It's amazing when you get somebody into just a head shop here that only sells like CBD, because they don't have a license for
right.
THC. And they're using terms like, oh, could I get a water pipe? No, you can say bong here. It's okay. So the cool part about Colorado, and I really can't wait for Wisconsin to get there, is that the stigma of it just doesn't exist. It's just not there. You go to a concert, you go to a bar, people step outside to have a cigarette, they'll step outside and have a joint. You're not supposed to do it in public, but it's just not a thing. It's not a big deal. Nobody cares. It's your own thing.
Right.
It's like somebody having a drink or having a cigarette, or it's the same thing. So I'm really hoping that Wisconsin can get there. And I think, I know she's been fighting on this for 8 years, but we're going to put out a call to all politicians in the state of Wisconsin, and maybe the 33 listeners that we have on our show right now. Just listen to your constituents, man. Just listen to them and give them what they want. This, like she said, this is not a partisan issue. I know
she was talking about the U.S. Senate. Don't you think Joe Manchin would be a much better U.S. Senator if he would smoke marijuana?
He'd have a personality, at least.
My goodness, some of these like U.S. senators, I think all of them would probably be much better representatives if they would just like lighten up a little bit.
Seriously, let's just pass, let's give everybody a joint for the next section of Congress, and let's just see how things actually start working at that point. Give them a nice indica, oh my Lord.
Actually, in all seriousness, I think Joe Biden is not very good on this issue.
He's horrible on this issue.
He's horrible on this.
I don't like his standpoint on
this
it.
is, he was one of the authors of the War on Drugs back in the day.
Oh yeah.
And he's been slowly trying to get out of that, but he locked himself into this nonsense.
Yeah. And he versus just saying, oh, by the way, I've kind of changed my tune. No, he just stuck with it. So maybe, I don't know. I don't think you're going to see anything happen within this next, 4 years, but who knows what happens next. It would blow my mind if the Republicans actually took the legalization thing to the polls, because they would win. Hands down, they would win. Whoever does it would win. So I've heard Bill Maher say it on his show a number of times. Whoever embraces this, make this your issue, make this the big deal. So I guess we'll see.
All right, Matt. Well, great show, and we'll hope to have her back again at some point.
I would love to, and maybe we could talk about things other than pot, because I want to know what else she does too.
Oh yeah, she's
she's
Melissa
amazing.
Agard is a fighter for all the great causes. We could have her back on to talk about that. So until then, let's everyone, as usual, stay elevated.
Stay elevated, everybody, especially after this show. Have a good one.
and Tony.
Like here's a good example, right? We just said on the show that a bill like this would really revive rural Wisconsin.
Mhm.
So why doesn't the Democratic Party make that part of their statewide agenda?
Right?